On today's episode of Dance Med Spotlight, I'm interviewing Dr. Emily Becker. She is a dance medicine specialist, physical therapist, and former professional ballerina. She's had the opportunity to work in a few different communities in the US. She's worked in a variety of different types of clinics and now is the owner of her own practice in Jacksonville, Florida, Arts and Athletics Physical Therapy. In this episode, we talk about some of her experiences in her dance career, all the way up through that professional level, receiving her diagnosis of ehlers-danlos, a hypermobility disorder, learning a lot about hip surgery and recovery and hip preservation from her work actually with a physician here in Denver, Colorado, several years ago, burnout in dancers, and so many more things. So we hit a lot of really great topics, and make sure that you check out this episode. Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today, I have Emily Becker, a former professional ballerina, now dance medicine physical therapist. Fun fact, she used to live in Denver and helped develop a protocol that one of our docs uses that I work with periodically. So even though we have never actually met in person, I'm well aware of some of her previous work here. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks so much for everybody for having me. Appreciate it.
So my first question that I always ask everybody is, what is your short story version of how you got to this point wanting to be a physical therapist working with dancers?
That's a great question. So I used to be a professional ballerina, danced for 2 years before I myself developed neurocardiogenic syncope, realized I had EDS. So I retired because I was breakdancing more than I wasn't. So I decided it was a good time to step away. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I felt really lost. So I prayed all night and woke up and was like, I'm going to be a PT. I didn't realize the course. I was very blessed. I applied to one PT school, got in. I had great professors. I'm forever grateful for the faculty at Virginia Commonwealth University. They are the best. So I was able to go through that. One of my mentors, Lisa Schoaf, helped me get into dance medicine as well. So I was able to TA some classes at Virginia Commonwealth University in their dance department, which was amazing. And then with my background, she helped me kind of integrate into the Richmond community. And then I moved to Denver shortly after I graduated and started working there. After that, I moved to Chicago and I was able to work more into hip preservation, got really into hip preservation in Denver because so many dancers were having labral repairs, labral reconstructions. And I really wanted to figure out if there was something technique-wise that we could do to prevent it. So I ended up being able to present at PAMA, Performing Arts Medical Association, on how to prevent labral tears and is it technique. And then that sort of just put me in the rabbit hole of really wanting to specialize and work with dancers and artists and make sure that they were represented in a field that's pretty different than normal PT.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it is truly such a needed area of talking about what is going on at the hips and how we can keep them healthy as possible, recover well, try to minimize the need for surgery if we can, and then what to do when we finally do need to get to that point. See it way too often.
Yes.
Thinking of some of that. So for maybe some of our dancers or dance teachers, people who aren't in the medical field, when we're talking about some of this hip stuff and hip preservation, let's first start with, what are maybe some of the more common hip issues that you find with dancers, and maybe some of the things that we understand or believe contribute to them?
Oh, great question. I think a lot of times we get snapping hip. So that's intrinsic or extrinsic. So intrinsic is when the hip flexor snaps over the capsule. Extrinsic is the IT band. I always think those are the kids that are like, look at my cool party trick. Like I can stand up and sublux my hip. And I'm like, you're really not, I promise you. That's just your IT band. So that's pretty common amongst dancers with how much we use our hip flexor. Labral tears are common amongst dancers. Sometimes there's differential diagnoses that dancers miss. Like it could be an ovarian cyst. So I always make sure that we're looking at all sides of the spectrum and things that could impact the hip, that it's not something systemic, but usually labral tears, snapping hip, strains are less likely. Sometimes in the little kids with kicking, we might see like a rectus type deal. Ischiofemoral impingement is on the rise, even in these younger kids, which is kind of disconcerting because usually we see that with only like total hips. So that's kind of frustrating that ischiofemoral is coming back. I actually just had a cheerleader who's 10 that had ischiofemoral impingement, which was crazy. But I don't think many people understand that. And with dancers, like that back attitude position, if that's starting to provoke pain, that's something to look at for ischiofemoral. And then subspine impingement. If we're working deep in those grand plies and we're having pain or pinch in the front, that's different than that kind of C-shaped pain that we usually describe with labral pathology. That could indeed be like a subspine impingement or something else. Those are the biggies. There's always quad stuff, adductors. Adductors after PAOs are really common. I think sometimes we rush back and we realize like a lot of dance focuses on pulling those adductors in versus maybe using those quads because we're kind of taught that like the quads are a dirty word. Don't use those. So I'm trying to explain to our dancers, like, if you don't use those, your knees aren't straight. And we also need those to help like pull up and out so that we're actually using the glutes and relaxing into the joint. So teaching kids like how to find freedom within that movement as well, because it all, as I've told all my patients, it all comes back to your hips.
Most definitely. I think there's so much like whenever I have folks come in, whether it's foot and ankle, knee, actual hip pain, low back pain. I mean, really, most body parts, it feels like there's usually that something ties back into the hip, especially for dancers because they have to use them so dang much and in ways that most other humans aren't.
Yeah. Mere mortals don't move like this.
Yes, exactly. What are some of the things that a dancer might experience that would make them concerned where it's like, oh, maybe I should go see somebody for this when we're thinking of some of those like hip pains or things that we hear about a lot?
That's a good question too. Usually I tell them when it starts to boil into everyday life. So a lot of times it's just even sitting to put down, like, let's put on our socks, shoes, and they like lift that leg up and they're like, oh, that's pinching in there. If it's impacting your ability to get through most of class, if it's not responding to like a day of rest or active recovery, whether that's foam rolling, walking, doing something totally different, weightlifting, whatever you use as your active recovery, if that's not responding, then there's probably a deeper issue. I always tell dancers that the labral pain feels like sandpaper. So it feels like your joint is just scratching like sandpaper. So if you have that pain, that's not normal. Anything that dancers are, I don't know any better word other than acutely aware of their bodies. We know things before doctors know things because we spend so much time studying ourselves and watching things in the mirror that we become so good at diagnostics on our own. So usually we know there's a problem. We just don't want to own up to there's a problem because we don't want to disappoint anybody. So I think it's being aware of this has persisted for more than 24, 48 hours. Nothing I'm doing is making it better. Heat's not helping. Foam rolling's not helping. I can't continue to take Advil like this because I appreciate my other organs and I don't want to burn them out. Just things like that, where if the normal things aren't helping, you probably need to go see somebody. It's usually what I tell dancers.
Yeah, I think those are some great guidelines for sure. I think to your point, we're acutely aware of our bodies and we are more likely to push through. And there's even research that talks about some of that, of dancers having higher pain thresholds and, where it takes more for them to even realize that there's something going on and then they can withstand more before it makes them stop. And so those are not a good combination of things when it comes to injuries.
No. And there was a little bit, speaking of research, there was a little bit that some of these guys were doing that are really into hip preservation that looked at dancers and that they actually sublux when we're doing like end ranges of motion. So Alyssa, whatever that might be, definitely oversplits, but that's a whole other topic that I could spend all day talking to you about. But that we're actually subluxing the joint with what we do. So I always try to make dancers aware of that sometimes we don't need more of that flexibility because of that subluxation. We need more stability. So making sure that they understand we're not going to shut you down. We want to help you so that you can keep dancing. Because I think a lot of times they're afraid to come in because if they've worked with somebody that's not dance specific, the first thing they're told is stop dancing. And
Mhm.
that's the last thing anybody wants to do. And that's
Exactly.
why I think what you do is so important, because you're out there spreading the word. You can still be a dancer. There are people that treat you, that understand you. So I really appreciate your network and what you're doing in order to get the word out.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that really is kind of the biggest thing for all of this is just letting people know that folks like us are out here and it's not just physical therapy, what we've got dietitians and people who are doing research on it and, all of these different folks, mental health folks, who get it.
Yeah.
And a lot of us have dance experience ourselves, so, like, we really get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What Let's kinda take a little different path here for a second. So, you said that you had received a diagnosis of EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. What were some things that you were noticing that either, like, made you go look for a diagnosis? What were some things where it was like, "Something is not normal or right with my body," that kind of led to finally getting a diagnosis with that?
That's a great question and kind of crazy. It actually had nothing to do with my dancing. I always took that mobility for granted, thought most people were made like that. When you're around that population, most of us have some sort of hypermobility, and that's like a gift that helps you succeed. It was
Mhm.
actually when I had my first child. She ended up having signs and symptoms of dysautonomia herself as a baby, like 9 months old, had 3 episodes. I was fortunate to work with the Virginia Lend program, which was part of my doctorate degree, where we worked with kids with neurodevelopmental disabilities. That program was amazing. If anyone can be part of a Lend program, you work with multidisciplinary specialties. Like, it transformed my life, and I met the geneticist there. So she helped me understand, like, this is what this looks like. This is other genetic things you might see in other kids, because I was really interested in working with teenagers and that kind of population. So that's the person that actually diagnosed me. I made an appointment with her after my daughter started having issues. I was pregnant with my son at the time, and she was like,
Mhm.
"I hate to tell you, but this is like a genetic thing, and everybody is all in this together." But it explained things for my kids later on in life too.
Yeah. It's a diagnosis that has so many different bits and pieces that can come along with it as far as what symptoms present or when some of the symptoms pop up. And so I think it's, something that is really underdiagnosed. I know also in PT school, we didn't talk about it much. And so, not even knowing what we're looking for sometimes unless we've had some exposure to it and learn more about it.
Correct. And so with hip pain, especially, it's something I screen all my dancers for. It's something I screen most of my population for. A
Mhm.
lot of times it's tying the symptoms together for them and understanding there's like 13 subtypes right now of EDS. So sometimes it can be explained by a combination or satellite of symptoms versus just one thing. But oftentimes they're like, I didn't understand all this was connected, or they felt not heard or seen. So I think it's important to even give dancers that voice, like, hey, there's something going on here that's systemic, that's outside of your control, and here's how we can make this work the 96th time that you've sprained that ankle and you're ready to like cut your foot off. There's some hope
Yeah,
here.
exactly. One thing I think that's important to understand too, as we're talking about these different things, when we're talking about some of the hip stuff and hypermobility like Ehlers-Danlos or other forms, that particularly if somebody has some of those forms of hypermobility, they're probably more likely to have some stuff going on with their hips too, just with how it all needs to function together.
Correct. Correct.
One of the things that I always find really interesting when I'm working with patients, and you alluded to this in relation to the EDS diagnosis and being able to kind of tie a lot of things together. I feel like one of our sort of superpowers as dance specialists working with dancers is that same thing, whether it's folks with hypermobility or not, where it's, I actually just had a new client recently who had been to see another PT and had gotten some benefit from what they were doing, made some decent progress. But there were certain things where it was like, I don't know why you're having this, or I don't know why we can't make this better, or, kind of running into some different problems. And she's telling me all of these different things. And I ask additional questions and do more testing and all of that, of course. And by the end of it, I'm able to kind of piece a lot of this stuff together to go, okay, well, when you're moving like this, when you're doing split leaps or toe touches, when you're doing your front splits versus straddle middle splits, and talking about the mechanics of all of it in relation to some of the other things that she maybe already knew about herself, where it's like, yeah, this is all connected. And so that's something that I always get really excited about when I can kind of help provide those pieces locking together for them a little bit.
I totally agree. And sometimes it's just understanding that every hip is different. Your versions in your acetabulum are different, your femoral version. So even the ability to turn out is kind of inherent within your body. Like you can't force it. You're going to have what you have. And I always tell these kids that up until 15, you're still going into those versions. You kind of get a degree a year from the time you're born. Like if you think about it, all those little kids that can do fifth inverted, and you're like, how are they doing this?
Mhm.
I just couldn't do that if I paid somebody money. But that's how we're made. And then we kind of work out into that turnout. And so it's like even empowering the dancer to understand you're not done yet. If you're a teenager, you still have a little bit of hope, but we got to be strong in that motion and work with what we have versus trying to force what we don't have. I mean, I think it's the research now indicates you get 60 degrees of turnout from your hip alone. That's it. You're not going to get any more than that. If you're the most turned out person in the world, it's 60 degrees, it's 60 degrees, it's 60 degrees. So we cheat everything else from the knee and the foot and ankle. So even teaching kids that, and that I think is again something that dance medicine is so fortunate that we've started doing this research, and there's so many great people in the field that are advocating for dancers and letting them understand, like, hey, you're not different, you're not bad, you're not unable. You just need to work with what you have and make the best of your alignment and your mechanics.
And it makes me so happy when I start hearing about studios and, teachers and different folks who are embracing some of that too, of, instead of just saying, nope, you need 180 degrees of turnout, you need as much as possible,
Yeah.
saying, your body, this is what we have, we can continue working on it, but I'm not going to force you to get into these really extreme ranges. So every time I hear one of my dancers say, yeah, my teacher's okay with me working here, it's like, yes,
I know, right? It's a little small victory.
I will take it.
Exactly.
Since we're kind of talking about this idea of turnout, what are some things that you would maybe recommend for dancers as far as like learning some of the technique or teachers teaching some of the technique to make sure that we're instilling healthy habits and not forcing things on our body?
You have great questions. I wish I was you. I think one of the biggest things is getting them to understand where the muscles are. So many times they don't know where those 6 deep rotators are. They think they're on the front of their body, like everything happens from the front. So just starting there, like, hey, these are where those muscles are. This is what they do. They have to be behind in order to pull your legs into that rotation so that they get an understanding of, now I know where to feel this. I think the biggest thing is getting them to turn on and understand it. A lot of times, if we overwork the glute, we can't get those rotators to fire as functionally as we would like. So then I think they get frustrated because they're like, I can't find this. I love the rotation discs, just getting them in parallel and working on those on demi points so that you can't cheat it, because you're forced to kind of stay in that neutral so you can really feel where that control comes from. I'm not a big clamshell advocate at all. It's my least favorite hip exercise, especially post-op. It really yanks on anything that we've repaired, whether you have the legs in extension or not, so slightly extended to kind of make that more mechanically advantaged. It still just gets too much of the hip flexor, TFL. We're not getting what we think we're getting. I'm a big proponent of functional training. So if we're going to dance and turnout, we need to be doing those exercises standing, because they're not going to feel it or hold it. I've been known to put tape marks on the ground in that 45 to 60 degree range and have them work technique through there. It's eye-opening for them. They're like, I never knew these muscles were here. So visual dancers are super visual. So the more visual cues we can give, it's super easy to take your goni and measure 45 to 60 degrees and tape some tape on the ground. It costs nothing, but it really does bring a lot of awareness to these kids in terms of, this is what I've got, here's how I use it.
Mm-hmm. I know one of my favorite things working on turnout or a variety of other techniques with my dancers is when they come and they say, I've been getting these corrections from my teacher, but I don't really know, like, I feel like I'm trying to do something with it, but I keep getting the same corrections. So then actually having an opportunity to be in the clinic or at the studio or wherever it is that we're working and start working on that together to teach them, here's what it feels like to actually use this muscle, or when they're telling you this is what it actually means. And
Agree.
when those light bulbs then go off, they get so excited about it, and so do I.
I do too. There's nothing better when they're like, oh, this makes sense now. Or like, I get what they've been saying, or this is what pull up actually means. You're not talking about my ribs. You're talking about lift out of my hip. Just so many of the things that we've been taught that are even, migrating into more of a science-based approach instead of just, I've heard this for 100 years and this is how this works.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Any other particular technique tips that you want to share for dancers?
I'm really heavy into quads, which makes me like the anti-teacher's favorite, but they really do imply and produce more of our force and power. So do our glutes. The biggest thing I'm trying to get dancers to understand right now, hip pathology or not, is that your standing leg dictates everything. So if you're standing leg and you're really able to feel that glute and pull out, you can actually relax the hip joint on your développé side to get more range of motion. And then once you figure out how to use that quad to extend the leg, we're not gripping in the joint. I think dancers are such people pleasers and they are going to try 150% effort every time that they don't realize so much of the art form is how much you learn to relax and what you hold. So what we're gripping can actually be detrimental versus what we're trying to make our bodies do. Most dancers don't train strength and power. So they want higher jumps, more split height, and they're not realizing that the reason they don't have that is because they have the range of motion, but they don't have the strength to get there. So working on things like that, like understanding here's how the hip supports you, here's how your foot and ankle works. But again, we want to use those bigger muscles so those little ones don't fatigue as quickly. Just trying to get people to understand their body is amazing and different and everybody's built differently. So it's okay to have things that don't look like somebody else, but how do we make them work for you? I think that's the biggest thing in terms of technique is that you're not going to look like the person in front of you at bar. And that's great. You don't want to.
Exactly. One of the other places that I really notice some of that sort of overworking of a lot of things when we're dancing is in relation to the rib cage, where sometimes it's almost like it seems like they're not breathing while they're dancing. And sometimes that then makes them anxious if they're performing because they're not breathing well and all of that. And we don't appreciate how much the movement of our ribs actually contributes to so many other things that we need to be able to do to make the beautiful shapes and movements in the dance.
Correct. I mean, and the diaphragm connects to that lumbar spine. So it's understanding. I always tell kids when I get somebody that's anxious or tighter that port de bras is actually the visible expression of your breath. I know we say it's the carriage of the arms, but before we plie, we do that so that we encourage our body to take a deep breath in and then exhale that out. My nervous turners, people like that, I'm like, are you breathing or are you holding your breath the whole time? Because the tighter you get, the worse that's going to be for you. Because again, it does increase anxiety. It does increase that whole fight or flight. So yeah, I totally agree with you. We often underestimate what's on top as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I like working on with exercises, especially if I know it's a dancer who has some struggles in the breathing arena, is helping them figure out those moments when they can take a breath. To your point of like the port de bras, that is a beautiful time to just kind of go, and move with it while other things are moving. And, when is a good time to learn how to exhale here or take a breath in or any of that. And those are things I've even played with for myself. I still dance and I compete in swing dancing and that sort of thing. And I've learned for me, like doing consecutive turns with my partner, that is a wonderful time for me to just like exhale and then get another inhale in before I do whatever the next thing is.
Totally.
And so it's been fun just playing with it for myself too.
It keeps it fresh too. Like sometimes I'm not gonna lie, sometimes bar is boring. Oh, sorry everyone. So like finding those ways of like focusing on something different. Like I'm gonna focus on my breath today so that it'll translate to my center work so that I'm feeling more confident with that variation. So yeah, to your point, there's so many ways you can mess with things so that you're always adapting and not getting stuck. Because bar is bar. We do the same 5-6 exercises every day. So what can I do to make that different so I don't get stagnant and keep growing as a professional?
Mm-hmm. Thinking of a few of the things that we've mentioned recently here with feeling stagnant in our dance, maybe dealing with anxiety or some of our people pleasing tendencies and perfectionistic tendencies that we may have, and that sort of thing. Another real problem that dancers face is this whole idea of burnout. What are some of the things that maybe you've seen, whether it's personally in your dance career or with working with so many dancers?
I appreciate you bringing this up. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, and there's some great ones, dance and all these people that are out there. Thank you, God, for bringing these people into the dance medicine world. This is amazing. But I do really talk to these teenagers about burnout. I think oftentimes they think they're depressed or anxious, and it's actually the physical symptoms of burnout. I'm trying to get teachers to understand it. So I have gone and done some lectures talking to teachers about burnout. It's a really tricky subject that I'm having a hard time getting people to accept. But there's a lot of physical manifestations of burnout, not just injury risk, but it does increase your heart rate. It does make it so that it's hard to sleep. And typically the kid that's burnt out is the one that I always use the example. You're at a dance team practice, and it's the kid that keeps messing up the tours in second, however, whatever you want to call those, and they're like, can't get it together. So every time they get hey, you're messing this up. We got to do it again. We got to do it again. We got to do it again. We're taking this kid that's already here and putting him here. And then their teammates are mad at them because they don't want to keep doing this either, So it's like all of the psychosocial aspects that you're looking at with a teen to begin with. Like, I don't want to be the center of attention in this way. All of those things are likely because this kid is already burnt out. We never know what happened at school. They could have had the worst day at school ever, and we're getting them in our practice session or for class or technique, whatever we're doing that night. And we haven't taken a minute to be like, this kid seems different. And there's always that kid that feels like the punching bag. Does that make sense? And whether it's self-perceived or real, that kid's probably in huge stages of burnout and needs some help.
Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say often. I occasionally hear from some of my dancers who come in certain things also where, whether it's burnout or just something where it doesn't seem like there's good balance in their environment and balance in their life and their training and that sort of thing, where, maybe they come in and they talk about, well, my teacher was yelling at me all the time, or, things where it seems like they perceive that there's a favorite in the class and it is not them.
Yeah.
Or, and so some of those feelings that sometimes come in, or feeling frustrated because they're still figuring out how to move their bodies the way that they're built, and they're not moving and looking like some of the other dancers that they're training with. Those are all things where when they're verbalizing a lot of that stuff too, it's like, okay, something is not in the right balance. What can we do? What can we talk about and see if we can help improve that balance a bit for them?
Correct. And sometimes it boils down to their sleep and their nutrition. Dancers are historically undernourished. Like, REDS is huge. I partner with a group called Nutrition Align that actually met in Denver. They're now in Vegas. They're fantastic humans. They work a lot with dancers with disordered eating and try to help with like REDS and all those things to bring that to people's attention. Stress fractures are 25% modifiable. The rest is nutrition. So making sure these kids are eating, they're drinking, they're sleeping. They're so afraid to take a day off. So we're doing competition all weekend, then they hit it hard all week. And they don't realize that's causing burnout because they're not taking that opportunity. Like, take your day off. You're going to come back better for it. Visualization is huge. There's research that visualizing your steps is going to help you use the same muscles. So just empowering these kids that there are so many other ways. If you're hurt, if you're injured, if you're burnt out, you don't have to give up what you love, but we can help. And I think sometimes they don't realize that PTs, dance medicine people, we get every side of that because most of us have danced or understand, you'd rather cut off your leg than not go to class, but maybe today you need to not go to class. It's going to be the best thing for you. It also may prevent that injury. If you haven't slept or ate or kept up with any of that, you're more likely to get hurt. And then you're not going to be able to do the thing you love because we didn't take care of ourselves.
Yeah. One of the things I always love explaining to my dancers is the idea that, our body has so much energy that it has available to it, whether that is just to help us breathe and digest and our heartbeats and all of that kind of stuff, or the dancing that we're doing. And so when we have injury, recovering from surgery, any of those kinds of things, part of that energy is also getting diverted to whatever is healing. And
Totally.
it means that if we are pushing ourselves a ton when we're dancing or we're not feeling well with food, getting our rest, that our body eventually is going to tell us it doesn't like that combination.
Yes, you're exactly right. And that's unfortunately too late, right? So we always hope that they come to us and are vulnerable with us ahead of time so that we can kind of prevent that train from continuing to roll into that station.
Hmm. I think that also kind of hints at a really important thing that I wish more people knew or understood, especially when it comes to physical therapy, but so many different areas of health and wellness where, of course, we love working with people who are currently dealing with pain or injury or recovering from surgery or whatever the case is. But there is so much that we can do from that prevention side, from, uh, providing some education to maybe help them modify some of their technique and training, maybe modify some of these other things in life so that there is a reduced chance of injury. Not saying that we're going to eliminate the chance because, I mean, it's dance.
Right.
Something's going to happen at some point, but hopefully we can minimize it and minimize time away. But really taking advantage and seeing, before it becomes a problem, go work with people, establish that relationship. And then that also allows us to get a better understanding of where were they starting before this thing happened.
Exactly, exactly. I think there's been so much negative research on injury prevention and people out there saying, hey, this doesn't really help, it doesn't really work. But I believe with how technical dance is in and of itself, that we can spot things that could become a problem later on. We can spot strength issues that they're maybe not attending to in class, or pieces that are underworked or overworked. I also think people underestimate a physical therapist ability for wellness. It's hard to access. A lot of times it is our cash pay folks like us, but I think a lot of us went cash pay so that we could offer more wellness services so that we could make an impact with these dancers. And we're not trying to be greedy. We just are trying to work within our limits and our scope and our knowledge set so that we can bring more to the table. So I think wellness is huge. Prevention is huge. Strength training is huge. All of those things, we are experts in the musculoskeletal system. So we want to be there to help with those things. So you're right. Come in before it's a problem too, so that it's not ruining your entire season.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've even noticed for myself in my swing dancing is, I have a history of a variety of injuries over the years. Shockingly, very few of them related to dance, but plenty of different things. And even when I've done my swing dancing, where those aches and pains and restrictions were getting in the way of some of the stuff I wanted to be able to do, or I would just be so sore afterwards. And so working on some of the things myself, making sure that some of my technique is a bit better, strengthening in the right places, working on different kinds of mobility, not doing any stretching, actually, any, intentional stretching, unless it's within an exercise that I'm doing. Um, and it's amazing to even experience the difference for myself of how much better my dance feels and how much better my body feels, even with hours of dancing. And it's cool to be able to then share that with the dancers that I'm working with of, I've gotten to experience this too. And I want you to be able to have that.
Totally, totally. It's freeing. One of the best things this nutritional line shared with me is if you're sore, you're not eating enough. And
Mm,
that's huge. You can change that. I always encourage these kids. I'm like, take a snack with you. If it's a fruit, if it's a nut, whatever you can do, throw it in your face between bar and center. There's always time to grab a quick snack. And they will be amazed at how much better they perform and how much better their mind is, how much better class goes. So I'm glad that
mhm,
you experience that for yourself, because it does help us educate when we live through it. It helps us educate others on how to be successful because we've kind of gotten a grasp of it. I wouldn't say I'm
mhm.
there yet, but I'm amazed that you have done it. And I'm like, kudos to you.
Well, and to your point of, you can always grab a quick snack. That also doesn't mean that you live off of coffee and energy drinks in order to get some
Thank you
energy
for
in
saying
your
that
body.
for the teenage population. Could you say that for them in the back? Their favorite
Yes.
place is the gas station. I'm like, no, where have I failed you?
Mhm. I remember the studio that I grew up at, uh, love the studio, spent, 14 years training there and still have gone back on occasion for classes as an adult. They had multiple locations, but one of them that I was at in particular, like in high school, was right down the little strip mall from a 7-Eleven and a Taco Bell and I think like a Burger King, and those were the main places to get food also, and so especially, like, when we were doing our summer intensives or something, it's like, "Oh, it's lunchtime," and it was like most of the kids were walking down there, and it was like a bag of chips and a soda or energy drink or, go get some tacos at Taco Bell before coming back and dancing for 4 more hours, and looking back now, it's like, well, I mean, at least we were getting some calories and we were eating
Exactly.
something in there, but maybe we could have had better options.
Exactly, exactly. And I always tell kids if that's all you have, go for it.
Mhm.
It's super important that they understand, like, because I had that bag of chips doesn't mean I'm going to dance X number more hours because I don't
Yep.
want those calories. That sometimes that's all you got, and I'm glad you took that salt. Your body needed that. But
Mhm.
yes, if you can pack ahead, always better. And then I always tell them the best recovery drink, and this makes them so excited if they can have milk, is chocolate milk. I'm like,
Mhm.
that before you go to bed, your body will thank you. So yeah,
Yes.
to your point, I appreciate the wiser choices, but if they're going to get anything in their face, I am glad for that.
Mhm. Exactly. Yes, and man, sometimes it can be tough to find good things, even if it's, like, any sort of dietary restrictions that somebody has or something like that, that really throws things in, a wrench in the works. And even thinking about another episode that's going to be coming out shortly with Dr. Jasmine Chalice, who's a dietitian working with dancers, talking about making sure that we're getting enough of those calories and everything, trying to make some good choices along the way, but it's important to get them. It's important to get some of those electrolytes and replacing salts if we're dancing a lot. Lots of different ways that we can get a little creative with how we're fueling our body. But
Totally,
something is better than nothing, that's for
totally,
sure.
totally. I agree.
Is there anything else that maybe you experienced as a dancer, especially since you danced at the professional level as well, where in hindsight it was either, "Oh, I'm really happy that this was part of what I understood or what part of my training was," or maybe on the flip side of, "I wish this wasn't part of
I got
the way that I was trained."
Um, I was super blessed. I was able to go to a performing arts high school. So I went to Virginia School of the Arts when it was still a thing. Um, whether I wanted to or not, every night I went to the YMCA and I strength trained or I swam.
That's awesome.
So I would dance from 1 until 8 and then work out until 10 and do it all over again. But I know that the reason I got to make it to that professional elite level for those years that I did was because of the time I spent at that Y. I'm forever grateful for that. A lot of dancers don't do that because they're afraid of bulking up. It was life changing. I had one injury I can think of my entire career. That wasn't a fluke. Like, the random I landed on my foot weird. But most of it was preventable and did stay at bay because of the strength training that I was fortunate to do.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a great testimony of what it can do when you are training well,
Yeah.
including outside of the dance studio.
Yeah. It
It's
was
an
amazing.
important piece. What are maybe some other things that you see with the dancers that you work with as common problems or concerns that come up? Maybe even outside of kind of like the physical side of stuff, but things that you hear them say or that they have questions about.
Oh, I'm trying to think. I've been in Denver, I've been in Chicago, now I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, and I have my own clinic here. So it's a different group of kids that I'm used to seeing. These kids are all high achievers. These kids are all perfectionists. These kids are all trying to do 18,000 things. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I hear is they don't know how to be good at all of it. They don't know how to manage their
Mm,
time. They're afraid of disappointing someone, whether it's their teacher, their parent, not getting the grades that they know that they can achieve. I think it's just going through the teenage years are so different now. There's social media. You want to be friends. You want to, it's so different than whatever I had to grow up with. And I don't envy
Mhm.
kids. You have to have a 4.7 to get into college, plus be the president of 18,000 clubs. And whether they want to go professional or not, it's still so competitive. And
Mhm.
I think with the advent of more of these really awesome dance teams that are, extending acro, like Minnesota, shout out, wow. But all that, like, let's do tours into an aerial. Then all of these, studios are like, hey, that's gonna win. And maybe these kids aren't able to do acro. There's certain kids that won't have that fast twitch that are able to pull off acro. They may have fear around acro. Uh,
Mhm.
the diversity of all of these dancers now is insane. You see these kids that can do heels, can do contemporary, can pull off the best Bikita variation I've ever seen, and they're all 15. I don't know where they're coming from.
Right.
So I think these teenagers are just inherently like, how do I carve a space in this field for myself? Uh,
Mhm.
and I think there's so many different ways. And going to college used to be such a stigma, like I'll never make it if I go to college, or I've failed if I've gone to college. I'm like, no, a degree in something else, in addition to taking time to dance, is never going to be a disappointment. But getting these kids to understand, you could go commercial dance, you could be a classical ballerina. There's all these contemporary companies. You could do cruise ships and save tons of money. I mean,
Mhm.
Vegas isn't bad. Be a rockette. But I think kids get so tunnel visioned on their path, and so overwhelmed that they don't even know where to begin. And that's, I think, a big struggle.
I always get really excited when I have a dancer that comes in, and I always ask, what is your goal with dance? Is this something you're doing for fun, doing for fitness? Do you want to pursue it in college? Do you want to make a career out of it? And like, what would that career look like if you think that's what you want to do? Just to give me a better picture of things for them and, what we're kind of preparing them for in the long run. But I always get excited when they come in and they're like, well, I really like dance and I want to keep dancing and maybe dance for like a small company somewhere or something like that. But I want to sometimes even be a PT and maybe work with dancers or things like that. And it's like, yes.
Yeah,
But I get excited when I hear some of them also recognizing that they can still be in the dance world and be dance adjacent without actually being a dancer, or meaning that that career has to look like any one thing. So it always makes me really happy when they already come in with that idea
sure.
versus me kind of, hey, did you know you could do this?
Yeah. And I love that terminology, dance adjacent. I think that's amazing. I love that phrase. I'm going to steal that. I'll quote you.
Please. Yes. But it's like, if you want to get into costume design and design some of those gorgeous tutus that everyone wears when they compete at YAGP, or you want to learn how to do some of the staging and lighting and sound mixing, and I mean, there are so many things that you can do and still be in the dance world
Yeah,
without even having to be a dancer, but you could still be a dancer if you want to too, which is super cool.
correct. I love that phrase. Yeah.
Let's see. You kind of hinted at this a little bit, but I want to dig a little deeper. Having lived and worked in Denver with dancers a lot, Chicago, and now Jacksonville, um, what are some other differences that you've maybe seen in some of these different communities, whether it's cultures at the studios, some of the training habits, anything?
Wow. That's a great question. I'm going to put my brain to work on that. Um, there's definitely differences culturally in terms of what's accepted at studios. Everything up north tends to be a lot faster paced. I don't know how to describe
Mm,
it other than the south is slower in terms of intentions, in terms of just everything. So there's a lot more patience, I believe, sometimes here in the south. The north is super fast paced. So it's like, get it done. Let's go. Let's roll. Out west, I don't know, you can speak to that. It's kind of chill. It's not as intense, but I think Denver had some of the best ballet technique I've seen in a long time. Uh,
mm,
there's a lot of great studios out there. I don't know. It's just so wildly different in terms of what companies represent the area as well. I really think if we're looking at ballet specific, if you have a thriving professional company, you're gonna have better ballet schools, better ballet dancers, better ballet opportunities. If you're in an area that doesn't have that professional company, I think it's something we should all be fighting for, and fighting to keep our professional companies moving, because all of that increases the artistic abilities that we have in the area. Watching better artists than you always makes you a better artist. So
Mhm.
I think that's a big thing, is there's not as many professional ballet companies in this area as what I've seen in the past. But Joffrey's Joffrey, so I was kind
Mhm.
of spoiled. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that's probably the biggest difference, is the lack of professional organizations.
I can definitely appreciate that. Even thinking in terms of the West Coast swing community that I've been a part of for quite some time now and have had a chance to travel around some, but we also tend to get dancers at any competition from all over the world. And so you get to meet a lot of people from different places and learn a bit about them. And we have a really strong community on Facebook, where we hear a lot about how things maybe work similarly or differently in different communities. And some of the best West Coast swing dancers that we have are the ones who are out in California, where a bunch of our pros live, that live in France, where we have some phenomenal pros. You kind of see where the groupings of some of the high level professionals or really strong teachers, that's where a lot of the really good dancers come out of. And you know that if you go to compete in some of those places, the bar is going to be at a little different level than if you go to some of the, kind of quieter communities where they don't have as much regular activity. Maybe they don't have some of the pros working there. Not to say that there aren't exceptions to that, but that is a bit of the trend that I notice even in a very different dance style.
Totally, totally. That was a better way of articulating that. Thank you.
We're here to help each other. Um, I guess another question for you, and feel free to take this wherever you want. So now you're working in your own practice, cash pay, um, getting to kind of set the terms and the rules and what you're doing and all of that kind of stuff, versus having worked at some more traditional kind of corporate structured PT clinics. What have you noticed as the difference of what you're able to offer with what you're doing now versus maybe what you had available when you were working at some of those other places?
Um, that's a great question. Time is the biggest factor. I have always been super dedicated to my patients. So I would come in early, stay late, work through my lunch. Even when I was in corporate seeing 25 to 30 a week, it was like, I'm going to make sure I give everybody a half hour. That was my goal and my commitment to my patients. At the
Mhm.
end of the day, I maybe wasn't the best version of me I could be, because I was exhausted. And it's always hard when you're doing manual therapy on somebody and shouting at somebody across the room to make sure they're doing things correctly. And it's not a bad model. I understand it. I appreciate it. I just really wanted the time with my patients, the time to talk about nutrition, the time to talk about your rest, the time to talk about recovery, the time to talk about, and I'm not a specialist in any of these areas, but just the time to get to know them, the time to understand what makes them tick, the time to really work on that technique. If I only had a half hour with them and they were dance specific, I would have to pick, do I spend time working on the manual therapy I know they need, or the technique I know they want? So I'm very, very grateful to have this opportunity where I can have the time to spend with them and hopefully make them feel like every minute is theirs, and that it impacts their overall well-being, not just you saw me for 10 minutes and then I'll never see you again. But
Right.
again, there's no shame in that model. I know there's a lot of us that work in that model. Uh,
Mhm.
I was fortunate to meet a lot of PTs as I was working, teaching people about the hip in that model. There's great therapists out there, and there's great therapists that make that work. I think as I got older, it was something that I was not able to do as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, in the more kind of corporate, more typical version of PT that people may think of, there's also a lot to be said for access to certain resources, whether it's equipment that you can have in the clinic or, you have a doc right down the hall that you can send somebody to and already have a really strong relationship with. or just more therapists to be able to see more people and that kind of stuff. But I think that's where we're lucky with some of the network that exists within the dance medicine world, where, making connections all the time in different ways, we have a lot of people that we also can fall back on and ask questions of and learn from. And, we are creative people also. So finding ways to still have access and create those connections with people in the community outside of PT. And so, we may have to work a little differently to get some of those things established than when we're in that more corporate type structure. But yeah, I'm with you. That timepiece is magical for me.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think this is a good opportunity for a special segment on the show. Now I've noticed I've started adding like this little dance to it as I say it. It's bound to happen.
I love
Dancer,
it.
what
Yeah.
people say. All right, so our special segment. We have the final bow. This is essentially the take-home message. We've talked about a lot of different things. We've kind of targeted some different audience members with some of the information that we were sharing. What's one thing that you hope somebody leaves with having listened to this episode?
Ooh, geez. We're all in this together. We're all a community. Your teachers, your healthcare providers, your parents, we all want the same thing for you. We all want you to be successful, whether you're a professional already or you're a kid striving for that. Never be afraid to ask for help. That it's not weakness. It's not bad. It's going to make you a better dancer all the way around. And there's tons of people that want to help you on that journey.
I love that. Last and certainly not least, the shameless plug. So this is your opportunity to talk about anything that you want to promote, anything that you have going on. Go for it.
I really don't have any. I'm so fortunate to have my clinic, Arts and Athletics Physical Therapy, in that Jacksonville area. If you have a dancer in that area, I'm happy to help out. I have strength and conditioning programs that are online. So even if you aren't in that area, I have that program set up to get dancers into more strength and conditioning that's appropriate for what their body needs. But that's about it. I'm sure there's more that I'll think of, but just thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. I'll make sure to share out your website link and any social media tags and that kind of stuff so people know where to find you to be able to learn more. But thank you for your time today. It's been great chatting.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.